Hi, it's Chris from Airwindows, and this is Airwindows Meter 041. Things have been moving kind of fast, so this weekend I get to dedicate the posting to Airwindows Meter, and hopefully this will hold me for a while with regard to developing it. I've been doing kind of a lot. I have all these notes here for stuff that I have to explain, which I'm quite looking forward to. And I'm going to be enlisting the help of Airwindows Content Hide D because we're demonstrating Meter today with real actual hit records. That's the purpose that it exists for, is to be able to show and tell whether something's a hit record or not. I may have dialed back the calling it hit record meter on the meter, but that's still the job it does. So why don't we simply get rolling and I'll get it playing with a little track that we like to call Day Tripper by the Beatles. So here's what you're looking at. The top part, and I will go and grab my references. This is a power display. It is showing peaks as a little cloud, and power is how widespread this cloud is and how many of these big blue dots are in there. The big blue dots are sort of loudness focused. If the balance between peaks and slew is a certain way, those dots get bigger. So what you want there is for it to occupy a big space. Having stuff plastered at the top doesn't get you everything. And again, I should point out that I've been working on this a lot. One of the things that I've done is to make it work on loudinated music. And it works very well on loudinated music now. You've got a different method for evaluating the loudness energy. And you notice that this is referred to as a hit record, which it literally is, but also in the sense of it gets the score that is all A's. And this has something to do with what the peaks are doing, but there's more to it than that. It's also referencing what the slews are doing. I'll get more into that in a moment. And what the zero crosses are doing. Those produce readings called detail and authority. Authority in particular is going to be very interesting as I keep going with this. And the degree to which all of those things balance produces a tone color. And the tone color is what this message down here, the second bar, you'll see that it makes a little faint thing. That's because this is very well balanced already. There's another thing to observe, which is that hit record scores are arrived at very quickly. For instance, let me double click it, which is what you do to blanket now. There's no longer a dedicated button. Instead, you double click it to blanket. And you'll see that it returns to a hit record score very, very rapidly. This is in line with our experience of when a hit record comes on the radio or whatever, and you instantly go, oh yeah, that rocks. Let me turn it up, let me hear more. You can double click it, and it gets right back to the zone real quickly. In this case, this is sort of the bridge. They're not singing at the moment. When they start singing again, or when the riff kicks in, like now, see, they're building up, and then riff kicks in, and it's a very good, strong riff, but it's making a pattern in dots that works for people. So let's talk about detail, and I'm going to move ahead to a different track. This is a David Bowie track, Golden Years. And you'll hear little bits of it, but I'm going to have it playing. So this is a slightly more open and slightly more bassy and full track. It's a 70s track rather than a 60s track. In this case, we've got peaks showing up in such a way where the vocal shows up as visible peaks when Bowie is singing. And detail here, it's not really over bright, but in some ways it's an even better tone balance. You've got this white balance here, and that is categorizing peaks and slews and zero crosses. So there is a thing where these things combine into a different measurement. Like peaks is like the blue dots. In fact, all the dots, but the blue dots are more important to peaks. They're more important to the sense of power that you get out of it, like by up here. And the way that works is it's trying to see how many places at once are showing lots of activity. So it wants a big dense cloud of dots, and that's how you get the feeling of power out of stuff. For the loudinated stuff, there's a separate thing, which I'll get to once we start singing. This isn't like that. This is a 70s track. Detail, the bigness of those red dots, that is how much slew energy is happening above and beyond the loudness of the peaks. So if the peaks are really just all slew energy at any volume level, notice it's not just loudest as the bright red there. This is showing how much the slews kind of stand out against everything else. And this is all about peak energy. One of the changes that's happened is Meter never measures RMS or LUFS energy for anything ever anymore. I've doubled down on that choice that I made, and it has given way to amazing results. So it's checking RMS, it's checking peak energy here, and we're seeing that it scatters very widely. This is showing you what the high frequencies are doing. Also, bassy sounds show up down here because they don't have a lot of slew energy. They're not rapid motions of the waveform. And then we get to authority. Authority has to do with zero crossings. Zero crossings are basically how big is the bass allowed to be relative to everything else. If the bass is allowed to be very big, then it's going to stay on one side or the other of the middle point for longer. And having loud bass, loud kick, stuff like that will do that. But it's more than just only that, because it also applies to low mids. And Meter can help you do low mids. So here's Golden Years finishing up, and I have another example which I can demonstrate authority with, and that is an Eagles track. The Long Run. This is continuing on a path of these are getting quieter and quieter as they go. That's not going to continue forever, but we're going to enjoy it while it lasts. And again, this is an Eagles track, so this depends on me using content hide D and talking over it. Like, I can't play this, but we can look at what it does, and you'll see, even though it is very quiet, power is still producing lots of those big blue dots, which mean the peak energy is hitting just the right balance with slew energy for a particular kind of perception of loudness. There's a Beatles track that demonstrates this even better, which I'll put on later. And the slew energy, it's not very slewy, it's not very bright, but because it's so quiet, it doesn't need to be. We're balancing the slew energy with the peak energy. RMS is hilariously quiet. It's always below all of the dots that you see is where the RMS is. So it's extremely funny if you looked at the RMS for this one. And you'll see we're looking at another giant hit record. This one is ABAA currently. The way these letters work is first letter is just A to Z total hit record score. Every successive one goes from, say, Z would be bad, right? it goes from lowercase to uppercase as things get louder and louder. So what we see here is there's a little room for the peaks to be more energetic, which is consistent for this track. Like this could be louder and busier. It's leaving stuff on the table as far as you could get it to be louder and busier. But the highs are very detailed here. And the authority, look at what's happening down in the extreme lows. We're seeing these little spots that weren't there for the Beatles track, Day Tripper. That was a 60s track. And we're seeing these large like blue spots there. And we're seeing even darker colors. Because what's happening with the authority meter is if we have green dots in the rest of these meters, green dots means the slew is way less than the peak energy wants it to be. So you see green, like right down here in the bottom edge. You see green when you have bass and nothing much else happening. So when that bass is not quiet, like this is an amplitude modulation here, when the bass is not quiet but is actually a lot louder, that green shades down to black. And you see that as a spot in the authority meter. So you'd be looking for high impact drums and things. Here, let's switch over to another track. This is Harry Nilsson. And this one starts out very quiet. So you can see there's bass happening. And that's what's showing in the detail meter here. Stuff's very quiet. This is the Harry Nilsson track, Coconut. It's actually a giant hit. You wouldn't necessarily know it this early on. But this is a steady, continuous build, and it does stuff with authority that's very interesting, but it also does stuff with the colors that show up in the authority meter. And it's worth studying, especially if you're doing modern loudinated type stuff. So you'll see what's happening is the power is gradually building up as he continues, because that's what this song does. It's kind of like Stairway to Heaven in that it starts very chill and then it gradually ramps up and up and up in energy. So what you're going to see is more dots showing up in the peak meter up here. And then you're going to see more happening in the slew meter here. And we've got the bass showing up at the bottom of the slew meter because slew meter is mostly going to show you where frequency content sits. High frequencies go to the top or even wrap around. And then the authority meter is essentially what's happening in the track. And there's some real specific things going on in here which are worth note, especially if you're doing loudinated material. In this case, we're going to start to see, as it zones in on that total hit record sound, you see that with the color here, the color in these stripes. If you make this window tiny, what you end up seeing is the color as a backdrop. And console X3 is going to have that color as the backdrop as well. But what we're seeing here is energy ramps up, and we're starting to see the authority show up, but it's doing an interesting thing. The dots are getting bigger because the dots are related to how powerful the sound is at any given point. The size of it is more or less how close the peak is to clipping. That means if we do loudinated stuff, it's a giant sea of huge dots. This is not. This is a 1970s track that is very spacious. But you'll notice that Zero Crossings is completely full of stuff going on, and we're seeing all the colors of dots showing up everywhere in this. I'm calling this churn. I feel like this is a hit record recipe that you can look for in these mixes, because what's happening is you've got bass, 100 hertz here, If you have a black spot, what that means is you have an authoritative kick drum hitting, or a combination of kick and bass. If you see a red spot down there, you've got an authoritative kick drum hitting, yes, but you've also got high frequency information happening at the same time. There's kind of a blend. And we can look at other examples of authority and contrast by doing one that has authority but very little amplitude at all. Here's an even more extreme example of that. This is a Michael McDonald track. It's called I Keep Forgettin'. And notice how quiet this is. This is normalized so that the loudest peak is clipping. It is actually normalized so that the loudest peak is a clip. So look at what's happening in the authority meter. The kicks are actually making these tiny spots in the peak meter up here. But what we get to see down here is you don't really see them because peaks happen very quickly. That's why people limit them away or clip them off, is because they don't think they matter. But the authority meter is able to show what this track feels like. And so in the peak meter up top, you see that when Michael McDonald is singing, we get peaks showing up in big blue dots, and that's the vocal. The vocal stands out. But what we feel, and yes, slews, nice blend of high frequencies without going too exaggerated. You can fill up the entire slew meter safely and get away with it if everything else balances. And then the zero cross meter right down here, we're showing all of the kicks. We're showing all of the snares. You see all the percussion in this track illuminated on this meter. It's coming through. Plus, it's coming through at all frequencies and at all colors. Like that blue color means we have a more sort of gutsy kick transient happening there because other things are happening at the same time. And the black spots are typically extremely deep bass transients that are still quick enough that in theory you can't hear them, but they matter. And now we can measure that. This is what you can do with using dynamic range and crest factor. And I'm going to beat that into the ground because we're going to show later how you can do loudinated stuff and accomplish some of the same things. This is simply the opposite. You can't do this and loudinated at the same time. So if you like tracks like this Michael McDonald song, there's a recipe for making it work. If you duplicate this behavior that you see on a meter, and you're going to have to leave a lot of headroom, but you'll notice if you look up at the top here, the peaks, it's using those peaks. Something's happening up there all the time. It's just that, like, quote unquote, you can't hear it because it's a bass transient. But you feel the bass transients in groove. And that's one of the things that all this does. We can skip ahead to, like, this is 70s, right? Well, what about 80s? I've got an 80s track to show you. This is Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer. Sledgehammer is kind of 80s maxed. It leaves a lot of space in it. Like, look at how far down these peaks can happen. They're not only down, they're leaving peak space in the 12 dB, but also all the way down to 18 dB actively. That's because there's enough dynamic range inside the sound that it gets to do this. Detail is fully using the slew meter. 80s stuff tends to be bright. It's actually not going into overslews. I'll show you more about what those do later. But it's pretty much fully using all of these. This is the 80s sound. Sledgehammer is about as 80s sounding as they come. There's other stuff that's equally 80s sounding. Trevor Horn did a bunch of stuff like this. Also notice something that you're beginning to see. This hints at stuff showing on the meter. Now, one of the reasons you're not seeing what this does very easily is that this classic stuff, when you leave headroom, it's forgiving. You can get a mix that just naturally feels good all the time. When you start getting it loudinating, it fights you much harder. You can still get the balance. You can still get a really good balance, but the harder you push the loudinating, the more it like writhes into your hands and tries to go to a bad sound. And when it does, Meter will tell you what's wrong with it. In this case, it leans towards claiming there's too much air. This is like a Trevor Horn. The Fixx also had this sound. This has this sound. It's that 80s sound of it's all peaks and sloughs, but the zero crosses could be bigger. So what we're seeing is that's only barely leaning in that direction. And the zero crosses are taking up a lot of fullness. We're seeing active use of this whole area. And there's lots happening between like 200 hertz and 60 hertz. It's not quite the Michael McDonald where it's doing stuff even lower than that. Some kinds of modern bass music love doing things down here in the 30 hertz zone. But this is an 80s track. It's like SSL style mixing, meaning that the machinery couldn't really give you a real deep bass. It just sounded good, but it's not as real a deep bass as you might want in modern stuff. Certainly, you don't get the automatic sub 20 hertz stuff that digital mixing constantly gives you. And we've got a really spectacular thing going on here. So that's 80s for you. What about that modern stuff? What about seeing what happens when you throw something that's really loud? Let me introduce you to Dillinger. Let me introduce you to Dillinger Escape Plan. This is a thing called the mullet burden. That's loud. As you can see. So this is going to be interrupting my talking a little more. I'll live with it. So here's how this works. This is off of a CD, and this is very solidly loudinated. But you'll notice that it's still getting a high score, and I'll tell you why. In fact, it immediately goes to a high score. I've made Meter track the duration of zero clips. That's what you see it doing here. It produces a little in terms of spare peak energy up there, which is all very loud. But it's not really getting any of that to work with. Instead, it's taking the duration of the clips and tracking how long they go, similarly to how zero crosses tracks how long zero crossing goes. And what we get is a whole tone color happening in this track where all the sloughs are basically over sloughs. Like the highs is to a point as loud as they can get. The loudness is literally as loud as it can get. There's no room to go louder. The duration of the clips is going on to like seconds on end without anything less than a full clip. But it's supposed to be doing different durations to get a good score. Much like the zero crosses go different lengths between zero crossing, and it's still able to track zero crosses, kinda. And so what we get is an overwhelming sound. And we see that the warning signs are showing up, but a funny thing, it's asking for less boring. Now, you might not think Dillinger is boring, but what it's finding is that the sound is a wall of sound that isn't changing. What Meter is able to see is doing very well at being balanced, but the wall of sound isn't varying. It's just full crank, nothing's happening. And if nothing's happening for extended periods of time, Dillinger or Meter doesn't think it's exciting. It's also looking for less harrowing. That's a useful instruction. So we can try a different Dillinger track. Here is one called Sugar Coated Sour. This is a different tone color, even though it is also full on. What we're seeing is this isn't doing as much in terms of constant clipping. The clips are happening kind of constantly, but it's not lasting for as long as the previous one. We're seeing a little more in the way of diversity and slews, and it is showing us different colors in the zero crosses, and it's able to stretch down kind of into the lows. And we have a little pause, and then they slam back in. And this is a point in concert where there's a famous video. They were playing this track, and then the lead vocalist charged and leapt onto the audience while this part went, as the guitar players are leaping around and flailing. It's an amazing band. And so what we see is all the dots are really large in zero crosses because everything's loud. But there's more of a churn of colors. Like, look at the way the reds and the blues and purples and so on are kind of all over the place. That's important. That's part of what makes this be a good sound, even though it's overwhelming and loud. This is after that first album. That first album was just go for the throat as hard as possible. They're learning to dial in more. The instruction of more fullness means zero crosses could have more going on and it could be occupying a wider range. And we can continue with the Dillinger zone because there is a track that doesn't even do the clipping. Instead, it does limiting. Calculating Infinity off of this same album. We start this one up. And this is a recipe of kinds of maximum loudness and intensity. And it's doing its thing in such a way that it's going to make meter go to highest possible score imaginable. Actually, it just stepped down a notch. But you'll notice that the sub-meters were all A-rated at a certain point. I warned you about how when you go for loudination, it's less forgiving. It's able to throw off the score more quickly. But you can still get into, like, we'll restart it, and it very quickly arrives at, oh yeah, this is worth listening to. And again, we've got spots in the peak area. We've got spots in the slew area, which are occupying a wide space. In fact, it's doing its best with that. And then the zero crosses are covering a range as well. And so back into loud mode. This isn't one of the total go for the throat ones, but they're doing a very metal sound out of this. And this is a very serviceable way to do a metal sound. They're doing a slightly production-heavy metal sound, and it's claiming too much air. What too much air, as a warning, means is there's a lot going on in slews, and there's a lot going on in peaks, but the zero crosses could be wider, fuller, more happening than just a narrow little band of events going on. Like in particular, this is being set up so that the lows aren't really as present. And there's an example that I can give of a completely different genre that maxes out everything, which I'm going to use for my patron video today. And that one is a completely different genre. We got Beastie Boys, we got hip hop. This is a track called Get It Together off of Ill Communication. It's one of the classics. It is also a hit record, and for good reason. This is a good example of not necessarily vinyl record grade spaciousness. This is off of a CD, but look at what they're doing with it. The genre hip-hop lets you have space so that you can strike all across the dynamic range because it's less of a continuous wall of sound. Peaks and drum hits and things are likely to be rapid rather than long and sustained. And you get a behavior like this. And the voices are able to produce peaks in that big blue dot range. The slews are able to produce high frequency events anywhere in this range. And the authority is going to fill up a wide space as well. Plus, look at how unpredictably the colors are placed in the authority meter. In the detail meter here, it's most likely to have like red colors up top, and then purple, and then blue, and then darker to like a black shade of green, down to a more light shade of green when very little volume is happening. But what's going on? Oh, don't get me in trouble, Beastie Boys. This is YouTube. The authority factor shows you this wild churning of color present everywhere in the mix. And I'm convinced that that is a recipe for making hit record sounds and maximizing it in an interesting way. In theory, you should want to have the energy in the mix be extremely unpredictable, even as you go to a zone like this, which they've gone to, where the color is completely white. White means perfectly balanced. They got to a zone right after that little pause where all of these ranges, and the color is power balanced with detail balanced with authority. Those are already subcategories. They are already caring about the space in the mix, caring about where the dots go, rather than just how many of them there are or whatever. It's trying to maximize having as much happening across as many ranges as possible. So some of the things that'll happen working with meter is you'll see, like it says, more calm, less harrowing. That's because we've got a lot of peaks and slews going on. But if you have just a loud drone, for instance, if you're doing ambient, you might see a claim of please make things less boring. That'd be because stuff's loud. It's not wildly wrong in terms of detail, but the authority is restricted to a very narrow band, and people will experience that as kind of dull. Whereas this is much more dynamic. There's much more happening. There's much more variety. People tend to enjoy the sound of that, and they did. This was a giant hit record and deserves that title. We can go back to modern stuff, though. For instance, let's go back to... did I do this already? No. So I did a bunch of Dillinger, but there's another band that does interesting things. Let's have a look at King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. This is a little track called Predator X. This is a sort of full track, and you can tell it's full because the authority meter is showing the drums as giant lumps of black. So if you're looking for authoritative drums, this is a good way of doing it. If you're looking for a big, solid, authoritative sound, this is also a way of doing it. Look at what the color does. Here's where the peaks live. They're all completely loudinated. This is a modern track. You got a lot of clips, but the clips don't all go as long as possible. There's a mix between, they're hitting this balance between peaks that are up here and peaks that have gone into full clipping. And there's a large variety in there. So that's important. That's part of what meter is tracking with this. Detail, same deal. They could have gotten away with a little brighter on this track, but they're going for big, heavy metal sound. And that's what we see in the authority meter. The color we're getting leans towards blue and black. Black is even deeper and bassier than blue. But we're also seeing brighter colors like these pinks and magentas. Pinks and magentas are on the way towards completely bright red. Completely bright red means super high frequencies. Much detail, much brightness. Also, that's just only the guitar. So this is a good guitar sound. as far as heavy music is concerned. It's not peaking that loud. It's peaking between 12 and 6 dB, but the tone color seems pretty much as good as you would want for this type of metal. And you can also see that the drum is hitting with the magenta spot right here. That's the snare drum. You can design things around that. You can design the snare drum to sit at, what is that, 200 hertz? It's centered around 200 hertz, and the color it produces is magenta or red. That's a working metal snare drum. And as everything comes together, we're seeing kick drums down here around 60 hertz, and this is all happening in a thoroughly loudinated mix. So you can use Meter to tell you useful things about loudination now. You're welcome. And now let me see. So this is not the only thing that King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard does, although they've made a very good track along this way, and it is a loudinated track that sits with the classic 70s tracks. We can also do something where Gizzard is doing modern mixing, you know, the lows that you get out of digital and so on and so forth. But this is a track called Ambergris, which is thoroughly, thoroughly different. Oh, it didn't move. There we go. This is called Ambergris. You're not going to hear that much of it, but it does get pretty solid at certain points. It is using all of the loudness at all times. It's just they're using more of the loudness for the drums. And that's why we're seeing in the authority meter, if you're seeing the authority meter pretty much solidly have something happening, it means you're probably loud enough even for the modern world. It's arguably a little louder than I like. When I listen to stuff in my car, what I have to do is automatically gain stage this stuff down to balance with my final records. Otherwise, it's extremely obnoxious. But we're getting that hit record behavior out of it. It's able to measure what the peaks are doing. We've got events happening in peaks. We've got the slews. It's not too bright, but it's bright enough. And the authority is really strong because it's a modern mix rather than, you know, old SSL consoles or whatever. That'll be a little bass shy. This, not so much. This has bass for days. And the solidity of the drums and bass and so on, and the way that it's balanced and mixed is just a wonderful example of doing all of this stuff right. Now, here's an observation on making this stuff work right. The zero cross meter, the authority meter, this is showing you how intense any individual thing is. So you don't have to want like a house music, EDM style, ultra giant kick all the time. Gizzard likes that. They've got an amazing drummer. They like showing off his kick drum. They like showing off stuff like that. So what we see is there's a lot of body and solidity to the sound. But there's also going to be a kick happening that you can clearly pick out when it really kicks in. It might be up around the 60 hertz area there. A lot of rock type music doesn't do kicks at like 45 or 35 hertz. It doesn't necessarily do bass music. We've got some depth in here, but it's not making a kick that goes 30 hertz and just goes rumble, rumble, rumble. You get to make choices like that. Figure out where you want stuff to hit, and then if it is showing up in the authority meter and can be picked out from other stuff, you've got enough of it. If you can't see it happening, you're probably not hearing it happening either, because it should take up its space in the zero cross meter. In this case, we've got basically everything taking up space all at once in the zero cross meter. You don't have to necessarily have things like the drums, the kick, the snare, making giant spots in that meter. Let's go back to the days of yesteryear. Oh, and here's where they get a little creative and did a sound effects break. Didn't throw off the meter or anything. But you can see where they did a different thing. And now they're doing back to the groove thing. But you can do this, okay, all the authority sits at 210 hertz or 60 hertz or whatever. This song is all about body. We want to have a retro kind of sound, which means not as much detail. But let's do our modern thing. What if you wanted to do proper retro, the way classic hits used to be? Let me show you something. This is the Beatles. This is a little song called Nowhere Man. And this was a ginormous hit. Here's what we get. You've got peaks that are completely putting the King Gizzard to shame. It is a cloud that is constantly full of maximally sized blue dots at all times. That's what a hit record sounds like. Mind you, it might be all in one ear because this is really old school Beatles. So it's like crazy dual mono mixing. This is from back in the day. And it's mixed on the old EMI Red console and so on, which didn't have any bass, but we're also looking at how this behaves. Like, what is it actually doing? And it's all on voices. And there's a little bit of everything else, but the voices are carrying most of the load. Detail is this incredibly even cloud from all the way up to a little bit of overslewing. We're not short on brightness with this, but all the way down to around here. And look at how even that is. This is hit record sound in action. There's a reason people sometimes jump to the conclusion of, oh, they don't make them like that anymore. Bullcrap. This is partly just about the sound. And look at what's happening in zero crosses. You don't have to make individual drum hits be the focal point. This is a blend of all instances of sound at roughly equal value. That's balancing too. So in this Beatles case, everything is of equal importance. You don't have a special dot for where the kick drum is happening, but you sure as heck have stuff happening everywhere. And if you're listening for where the kick happens, it's probably one of these blue spots down here. That's probably kick drum and bass. But it's not overwhelming everything else. It's in balance with everything else. And this is something that people can do. You can absolutely do this. Dial it in, make it work. You can tell whether you've got the kick drum thumping like an 808 or not. You don't have to choose to do that. You can choose to do whatever you want. Now I've got an interesting example here. We are going to move on to a Foo Fighters track and watch what this does. This is off of the first Foo Fighters album. In theory, very, very different. Notice, however, that the guitar tone is perfect blue sonority at exactly minus 12 dB. That's the tone color that he's producing. And then when the band kicks in, look at what we did. Does this look familiar? It should. This is Alone in an Easy Target off of the first Foo Fighters album. Has been a successful band, let's just say. Look at that. So, peaks full of energy there. Yeah, slews full of energy, perfectly evenly balanced. Check. It's not quite over at quite the same position. Zero crosses in which nothing is particularly over anything else. Also check. And this is, of course, Dave Grohl playing the drums. That is the sound of this classic Foo Fighters track. And we can literally switch back over to Nowhere Man and not ruin the hit quality of it. It's just slightly shifted. You could remaster Nowhere Man to act like Alone in an Easy Target. All the ingredients are there. And then back to Foo Fighters. Everything shifted up in loudness more in a little bit. but the evenness of slews, exactly the same. And in fact, the evenness of zero crosses is also pretty much the same. You got a little bit of that churn I was talking about. You can see where the kicks are, but it's not completely overwhelming everything else. It's just a little space. He could have left a little bit more room, like just over 100 hertz to fill in. He could have let the bassist show up a little bit more. But all the same, there's dots showing up there. It's not just a completely empty gap there. And that's how this works. It works by getting the right behavior in these meters, and they'll tell you what they want. So I've got one further thing to show. And that is, what if you went for the retro sound, the uber retro sound, but then you did it in such a way that you're still looking at kicks and stuff. In other words, we've got a big hit record sound that is totally loudinated. What if we dialed the loudination all the way back, but still had like this exact recipe for like not necessarily too bright. The bright slews are not all that aggressive. And then the body of things is sitting around mid-range like there, but then there's room on the bottom for there to be a lot of specific authority around like kick drums and punch, rather than it just being like with the Beatles, the wall of sound, where you can't pick out individual kicks. Let me introduce you to Aerosmith. This is a little track called Walk This Way. This should speak volumes. In theory, you could make it be a little bit louder and get away with it. But this is a ginormous hit record for very good reason. We're not going to see any of the messages down here because it's perfect from beginning to end. The specific messages that it'll tell you, I will let it go for a little bit and I'll tell you what the messages are. It can say less bright for if the brightness is too much. Too much air is too much bright, but also the peaks are a little too crazy. Allow fullness means that the zero cross is going bonkers, but other aspects aren't keeping up, like think Money for Nothing, Purple Rain, or whatever. You can let the foundation be a little bigger. Allow detail is loudness and zero cross are doing amazingly. And mellow ambient stuff might see allow detail. Allow activity, only loud, but neither slews or zero crosses are interesting. Less boring is that, but louder than that. Less harrowing is like that, but it's also loud and bright and aggressive. And then more calm is everything is over bright and aggressive. And this is such a great hit record track that none of that's going to show up down here. Instead, we just have pretty much the ultimate sound in that the peaks are filling up the full range. There's a little room to put it, but it's using those peaks very correctly. Slews are also making a perfect little cloud that's very evenly dispersed. And then the zero crosses are making a terrific crowd covering like all the way up to 900 hertz and all the way down to like 45. When there's kicks, it's not just the kick drum, it's the full band. And you see these giant spots, but they're not necessarily associated with only a kick. They're when the weight of the band all comes together and goes wham. And that's happening lots. We're getting a lot of that. And that's what Aerosmith was doing to the fullest extent. Everything is balanced. There's a bunch of other Aerosmiths like that as well. Like the track Dream On is very impressive in that way. It balances incredibly well. But this is Airwindows Meter. And with a bit of luck, I've talked you through how to use this. You go through using these meters, and they should tell you what to do. And then if that's not enough, there's a little message that shows up down here when stuff is extremely off balance. And it should tell you what you can do to the mix to amend things. Again, it'll be able to say less bright, too much air, allow fullness, allow detail, allow activity, less boring, less harrowing, or more calm. And those don't have to be frequencies. They might be arrangement things, like don't have as many instruments playing, or take out the tambourine part here, or overdub a guitar or something to fill in this area. Like, not enough fullness? Okay, throw in a Rhodes part or something that fills in that low-mid space. That'll give more fullness, more will be happening, and boom, there you go. And that is about it, really. Oh, now it shows allow fullness because we did the fade, and the fade means you can see it. So that's going to do it for this week. This version of Airwindows Meter 041 is the one that incorporates those instructions that show up in the lower bar. If you wind up shrinking it down to a tiny postage stamp size, it will draw the entire background with tone color, but it won't show you that instruction. That's okay. The instruction has to do, like, this is not some AI or something. All the instruction is, the opacity is how vivid of a tone color it is. In other words, how far it is from white. And the specific thing that it's saying is hue related. So it'll say allow fullness if you're looking at that green color that we see depicted on the screen. And that should do something as far as helping people actually use Airwindows Meter. That would be my hope anyhow. I'm hoping this makes this easier to use. And I'm hoping people appreciate the fact that I brought it into the realm of modern loudness war, even though I don't enjoy that. I'm thinking you can make much better hit records if you trade off some of that loudness for dynamic impact and then use the authority meter to do stuff like have a cool, interesting cloud of information, but then you should also be able to pick out things like cool events, cool vocals, cool drum hits, or the band coming together at a vital moment with additionally intense dots, which is going to mean having that stuff peak right up at maximum or perhaps a little way farther into the zero cross. But, I'm not your mom. Do what you like. You should be able to get some use out of this. And that was Airwindows Meter 041. If I do any changes to it, it would probably be having to do with that message showing more or less. And so I will ask people's opinions in the comments if you have watched this far. I'll say, yeah, if you would like to see that message more often, one of the reasons I have it fading out is that if it was at full opacity all the time, as you got closer to the perfect balance, it would start flicking around crazily, which is distracting. So I decided to cool that off. But there's stuff that I could do. All of this is supported by my Patreon. I don't have time to talk much more about that, but all this is supported by my Patreon. So if you like me doing this work for you, throw money. Help me pay off my credit card debt and keep working, because I do get to do this full time. That's why you have this today. Hope you enjoy Airwindows Meter. Bye-bye.